Hello friends, welcome to my newest video all about rendering a portrait from start to finish. This will not include a sketch. I am just going to start with a sketch I already have. So let's jump into it. I always start with lowering the opacity on my sketch layer and then creating a new layer underneath this sketch layer. And this is what I like to call my base colors. I will have all of my main base colors on separate layers to start. I just wanted to mention what I call my main base color layers are usually the skin, the pieces of clothing, the lips, and the whites of the eyes and the hair. So another step I've been adding into my rendering routine, I should hashtag that, render routine. But anyways, so it's this kind of, I like to keep I have like a control issue, I feel like, so I like to like do very strict, solid outlines of things. And then in order to make my piece feel a little more soft, I actually will go back through on these base color layers and blend the outer edges of these colors. That's probably not completely necessary because you could just use like a soft brush or a soft eraser. This is just how I do it, and I just wanted to make a note of that. So if you wanted to try it, maybe you would like this process too. So this is kind of my favorite part of rendering a character right now. It's called color mapping, which is essentially just finding the different undertones of like somebody's skin. And you'll always start with like a red color in the center of the face and kind of where like there's a lot more blood flow. And then on the upper side of the face, you're gonna want to put like a warm yellow tone. And then on the lower side of the face, where it would kind of be living more in shadow, you're gonna want to put like a grayish blue tone. And then just go ahead and watch the magic happen. I guess I should explain how the magic happens. That would be by blending it out, or you could even use the gradient tool under the tools bar. I feel like this is my favorite part because it kind of instantly gives a little more life to your character without even really having to do much at all. So I always kind of do the same order for when I'm rendering a character. So the next step for me would usually be adding some simple shadows to the face. I like to find the skin base color layer and put a clipping mask above that, and then choose my shadow color and start adding shadows. This is where you're going to want to have at least a simple idea of where your light source is coming from, because you don't really want to be throwing shadows just pretty much anywhere, which I still do that sometimes. But this would probably be, the light source would be coming from the front of her, of course, and probably the top left, kind of above her. I'm sure by now you'll have noticed this about my artwork, but I'm not a person to plan things way in advance. I like to do things more in the moment or what feels right. So that being said, I now am playing with the shadow color on the face and just kind of getting a sense of maybe what colors I would like to use. Like probably a cooler tone makes more sense to me for this piece, and that's why throughout the piece you'll see I kind of stick with this cooler blue tone, and I think it really complements the portrait. You'll also notice that I'm very into using lots and lots of layers, and I know it's really cool to use just one layer, and I think there's a time and a place for that, but if you have the layers, you might as well use them, and you can always merge the layers together later. So I usually always do this with my shadows, and any color I'm putting on top of these base colors, I usually will create a clipping mask above it. So as you can see with the lips, I always make the upper lip a little bit darker than the lower lip. I also like to add a little bit of shadow on the underneath side of the lower lip too, to just give it a little more form. Then I'll go in with a blend brush and really start blending out the outer edges of the lip to make it feel a little bit more like it's attached to the face rather than just like an object sitting on top of the face. Here's another one of my favorite parts, and that's adding highlights. We're going to use another layer, actually a clipping mask on top of the skin tone base color layer again. And we're going to start adding in a lighter color. This is super fun to me because it really starts to make the face look like it's coming to life, and it looks like more of a three-dimensional object. And then of course we're going to go through and blend the kind of outer edges of these colors that you already laid on the face. So for this character, I wanted to make sure she had like a lot of blush on and a lot of like redness coming through on her face. So I went ahead and added that with just a soft brush, and then I liked to blend out certain areas of it, but then I kept other areas kind of sharp because I really like the mix of the sharp and soft blend. Occasionally you'll see me turn off the sketch layer and go in and really blend these different layers out, because sometimes when you have the sketch layer on, it looks really good, and then when you turn it off you realize it's not as blended as you would like. Another thing I've been really enjoying doing is on the fingers and kind of either the palm or the outer side of the hand is adding like a pretty heavy, like deep red, warm tone, because if you think about it, like a lot of times you have a lot of blood flow in those areas and they are a little darker than the rest of your skin tone, and I think it just really makes the hand pop. Also, her hand is sitting on top of her other skin tone, so this will also help you recognize that the hand is not just a part of her neck. And if you didn't catch how I did that, all I did was grab the selection tool and I traced the outline of the shape of her hand, and then I went in with a brush while that was still selected and just colored it, and then I blended it out afterwards. Now let's move on to some hair rendering, my favorite and least favorite part. Just depends what mood I'm in. So I always struggle with rendering hair. Some days I get it and other days I don't. With this piece, I was kind of in a I don't get it phase, but I didn't want to let y'all down, so I'm going to try my best to explain my process behind this, even though this might not be how I usually would actually approach rendering hair. I think hair for me is so different with every portrait you do, since it's all very different complex forms and shapes. So I'm still getting the idea, or trying to grasp the idea of like how I would actually shadow and shade hair, because it's all these individual little strands, which I know a lot of other people struggle with. So let's go ahead and go through what I'm doing. Like the skin tone, I like to start with the shadow forms. I don't know if that's the right word, but I like to start with the shadows And I essentially just look at the whole piece of the hair shapes and try to find where the shadows would be, if that makes any sense. Then of course I will move on to the highlights on a separate layer, and I think this is your opportunity to add in some different toned highlights rather than just a simple white. As you can see here, I'm adding in a kind of a reddish brown highlight, just really emphasizing the color of the hair. And with laying any color down, I always go back and blend out certain areas of whatever I just put on my piece. This is a process I do currently. I don't know if I'll always keep this, but to me it just really softens certain areas and gives it a more semi-realism look. For the eyebrows, I always do some strands kind of on the front and then keep the rest of the brow pretty solid. I then use a soft erase brush and erase the front parts of the brow and then kind of blend that out as well. Now, as you'll see, I'm actually going to just start adding more layers of highlights and shadows and blending those layers out, and more highlights and shadows on all of the different features just to get those to really stand out and pop and start to become a little bit more like a 3D form as opposed to its kind of 2D look that it has right now. Alright, for the eyes, I like to take a darker kind of blue toned shade and add that on the white base color layer of the eye whites. Wow, that was a mouthful. But that will just give your eye like a little more dimension. So then when you add the color of your eye and your iris and everything and the pupil, you're going to put that underneath that shadow layer and set the shadow layer to multiply, which will give whatever's underneath that shadow layer a darker shadow. So as you can see on like the top of the eye color here, it's a little bit deeper color, which is kind of naturally what your eyes would look like if they were kind of under your eyelid like that. I'm sure you noticed I already had an eyelash line on the piece, but I hadn't talked about it yet, and that's because I wasn't happy with it. So I wanted to talk about it now because I'm adding the new final look of the lash line. I wanted to keep it a little more realistic and a little thinner, lighter pressure, and I think I achieved it this time a lot better. Whenever I'm doing a lash line like this, I always just go very slowly And then after I'm done applying it, I always, of course, take a blend brush and lightly blend it out to just have it feel like it's setting on the piece more. You'll notice I changed the eye color to blue eyes. What can I say? I'm a sucker for blue eyes. And then I go ahead and merge the entire piece that I have so I can move on to my next stage of rendering. The next stage of rendering for me is those final sharper details that I want to add to the piece. This is things like darkening the nostril holes or adding in those fine hairs that you want to add in, or just really fine-tuning things. You'll also notice I flip my canvas a lot and I start to look at the symmetry of the eyes as I've been adding lots of elements to this piece. I want to make sure that it's all still looking, symmetrical, I guess. And you'll notice it doesn't a lot of times, so that's where the liquify tool in the tools bar comes in handy for myself. You don't want to overuse this because it can really mess with the pixels on your piece, but it is really nice just to slightly nudge something up or down or to the side if it's really not what it's supposed to look like in your piece. When it comes to adding these fine hairs on your hair, I think it really makes your piece stand out because it gives it that semi-realism look without having to completely overdo it or draw every strand of hair. And in this section of rendering too, I also love to add in sharper shadows that really make the piece pop. At this point, I wasn't super happy with the shape of the hair, so I actually ended up doing a lot of erasing and undoing and erasing, and I think in the end this was worth it, and that's the reason it's really nice once you merge all the layers that you can actually erase just the one layer and start adding in those details that you are wanting to add in. Something I think that makes my art really pop is by adding these really dark kind of outlines to certain areas of the face or the hands, and to me that really makes parts of my piece stand out a lot. I would say one of my final steps of rendering a character would have to be playing with the colors in the curves map. Definitely check that out if you haven't. It's really handy to be able to adjust very specific things in your piece without completely compromising a different color that you want to keep. But of course, we all know the only reason we even make portraits is to add those highlights. I know you know what I'm talking about. So this is probably the very last thing that I do on my piece, and it's to add a vibrant highlight throughout to just really add a pop of something. You're definitely going to notice in my final piece that the lips are a lot different. I really wasn't super happy with them, so I played around a lot with the liquify tool. So don't be scared when you see her smiling in my final piece. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned at least something, and let me know in the comments down below if there's anything you want to learn next or any other videos you'd like to see from me. So thank you so much. I will see you guys on my next video. Bye, friends.